Welcome back to our channel, where we uncover the hidden truths behind the gilded gates of the British monarchy. Today, we bring you a story that shatters the very foundation of the Windsor legacy. Princess Kate leaves the palace after William's secret letter is exposed, and sources say the marriage is over. This was not a scheduled royal tour. This was not a temporary retreat to her parents' home in Bucklebury. This was a fracture in the timeline of history. To understand the magnitude of what occurred last Tuesday night, one must look past the official press releases and gaze into the shadows of Kensington Palace. It was shortly after 2 a.m. London was asleep, wrapped in a cold, unyielding drizzle. Usually, apartment 1A is a fortress of silence and security, a sanctuary for the future king and queen. But on this night, the lights in the private drawing room remained blazing, casting long, distorted shadows against the rain-slicked windows. There were no motorcades. There were no royal protection officers lining the driveway in ceremonial uniform. There was only a single, black Range Rover, its engine running quietly, the exhaust mixing with the fog. The figure who emerged from the side door was not the poised Princess of Wales the world is used to seeing. She was not wearing a designer coat dress, nor was she waving to an adoring crowd. Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked with a terrifyingly fast pace, her head bowed, clutching a small, leather document case as if it contained the nuclear codes. Inside the palace, the staff, men and women trained to be invisible, to see nothing and say nothing, were reportedly paralyzed with shock. A source close to the household whispered that the air in the hallway was so thick with tension it felt suffocating. They watched as the future queen walked out on the future king. She didn't look back, not once. The grand entrance, usually a symbol of power and stability, looked like a gaping mouth, swallowing the last remnants of a fairy tale. What could force a woman who has endured decades of media scrutiny, family feuds, and the immense pressure of the crown to finally walk away? It wasn't a sudden argument. It wasn't the stress of her recent health battles. It was a piece of paper. Resting on the antique mahogany desk in William's private study, left carelessly open, was a letter. A handwritten note that should have been destroyed the moment it was read. It wasn't an official state document. It was personal, intimate, and devastating. The contents of that letter, which we will dissect, revealed a betrayal so profound that it rendered the title of Queen Consort meaningless to Kate. For years, she had been the monarchy's greatest asset, the steel in a velvet glove. But steel, when struck hard enough, doesn't bend, it breaks. And that night, under the cover of darkness, the steel finally shattered. As the Range Rover disappeared into the London night, leaving Prince William standing alone at the window, the monarchy faced its greatest crisis since the abdication of 1936. The facade is gone. The truth is out. The silence that greeted Prince William the following morning was not the peaceful quiet of a royal residence. It was the hollow, echoing void of a home that had been abandoned. Sources inside Kensington Palace report that the Prince of Wales awoke early, as is his routine, expecting the usual hum of family life, the distant sounds of children, the movement of staff, the presence of his wife. Instead, he found a stillness that chilled the blood. He moved through the corridors of apartment 1A, calling out her name. There was no answer. When he reached the private drawing room, the scene that awaited him was frozen in time. A tableau of a marriage abruptly severed. The heavy oak doors were ajar. The fire had long since burned down to cold ash. And there, on the center table, lay the object that had shattered their union. It wasn't the letter he had written. That document was gone, taken by Catherine as evidence. Instead, it was her sapphire engagement ring, the iconic symbol of the monarchy's continuity, left starkly alone on the polished wood. The removal of Princess Diana's ring was a statement louder than any scream. For over a decade, that ring had been welded to Kate's finger, a symbol of her duty and her burden. By leaving it behind, she was not just ending a relationship, she was resigning from her role. She was telling the future king that the contract was void. William, reportedly struck by a wave of panic that royal aides have never seen before, immediately summoned his head of security. The question was simple, desperate, and terrifying. Where is she? But the true horror lay in what Catherine had taken with her. The secret letter in question, the catalyst for this midnight escape, was a handwritten correspondence William had drafted to King Charles just days prior. It was never meant to be seen by the princess. Insiders suggest the letter detailed a regency strategy, a cold, calculated plan to limit Catherine's influence over Prince George in the event of the king's passing. It discussed managing her popularity and, shockingly, hinted at a willingness to sideline the Middleton family to appease the more traditional factions of the palace, specifically Queen Camilla. William had seemingly agreed to trade his wife's autonomy for the security of his own transition to the throne. He had chosen the crown over the woman who had saved it. Now, staring at the abandoned ring, the full weight of his miscalculation crashed down upon him. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had handed her the weapon that could bring down the entire House of Windsor. The princess was gone, and she had the proof of his betrayal in her hands. While Prince William stood paralyzed in the silent hallway of Kensington Palace, the shockwaves of Catherine's departure were already traveling at lightning speed to Highgrove House in Gloucestershire. It was not yet dawn when the secure line in King Charles's private study began to ring. This particular telephone, an encrypted red device, rarely rings unless the country is at war or a senior member of the family has died. The king, already awake due to the discomfort of his ongoing treatment, lifted the receiver. On the other end was not a government official, but his eldest son, a man who sounded less like a future monarch and more like a child standing in the ruins of a house he had just burned down. The conversation that followed was brief, brutal, and devoid of royal protocol. William did not mince words. He informed his father that the Princess of Wales had vacated the palace, that she had removed her engagement ring, and most catastrophically, that the regency strategy draft was missing. Sources close to the king describe his reaction not as anger, but as a cold, paralyzing dread. For Charles, this was not just a marital spat. It was the resurrection of his worst nightmare. The ghost of the 1990 seconds, the War of the Waleses that had nearly destroyed the monarchy, was back. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher because the opponent was not the emotional, volatile Diana. It was Kate, the disciplined, stoic professional who knew exactly where the bodies were buried. Charles immediately ordered a Code Black protocol, a level of lockdown usually reserved for a terrorist threat. The head of royal protection was summoned. The objective was not to arrest the princess, but to locate her before the press caught wind of the extraction. However, as the tracking data from the royal fleet came in, the king was dealt a second blow. The black Range Rover Kate had taken was found abandoned in a quiet mews in West London. Empty. She had switched vehicles. She had gone dark. The realization hit the king with the force of a physical blow. Catherine had planned this. She had anticipated the tracking, the surveillance, and the immediate response. This was not a flight of passion. It was a military-grade extraction operation. By vanishing into the shadows, she had taken control of the narrative. The king, pale and trembling, reportedly turned to his private secretary and uttered a phrase that will likely haunt the history books. She has the document. She has the power to end the reign before it truly begins. The monarchy was no longer in control. The Princess of Wales had gone rogue, and she was armed with the truth. As the sun rose over a fractured London, the Code Black operation moved from panic to precision. Intelligence agencies, usually tasked with protecting national security, were quietly deployed to locate the Princess of Wales. The king's advisors were certain she would head to Bucklebury, to the safety of the Middleton family, or perhaps to an airport for an international flight. They were wrong. Catherine was not running away. She was digging in. At 8 a.m., a signal from a burner phone was intercepted by royal security. The location pin did not point to a private residence or a hotel. It pointed to the heart of the Gloucestershire countryside, specifically to Gatcombe Park. The realization struck King Charles with the force of a tectonic shift. Catherine had not sought refuge with outsiders. She had gone to the one person in the royal family who commands more respect than the king himself, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. This alliance changes everything. For decades, Princess Anne has been the iron woman of the monarchy, the hardest-working royal, and a stoic traditionalist. It was assumed she would always side with the crown, but sources suggest that Anne has long harbored a deep, silent resentment toward the court of Camilla and the machinations that have sidelined true duty in favor of PR games. By opening her gates to Catherine, Anne was not just offering shelter. She was choosing a side. She was signaling to the establishment that the future queen had the backing of the old guard. The phone call that ensued between King Charles and his sister is rumored to be one of the most volatile in Windsor history. When the king demanded access to his daughter-in-law, Princess Anne reportedly refused, stating with her characteristic bluntness that Catherine was under her protection and would not be coerced into a silence she did not choose. The king was checkmated. He could not send security forces to raid the home of the Princess Royal without causing a constitutional crisis that would tear the family apart publicly. But the situation grew even more dire for William and Charles. Intelligence reports confirmed that legal counsel had arrived at Gatcombe Park, not the usual palace solicitors who prioritize the institution's image, but a high-profile, aggressive legal team known for handling high-stakes divorce and defamation cases. Catherine was strategizing. She wasn't just planning a defense, she was preparing an offense. Inside the walls of Gatcombe, the secret letter was likely being analyzed, authenticated, and prepared for what insiders are calling the nuclear option, a public release that would expose the regency plot to the world. The monarchy is now split in two, the king and queen in London, paralyzed by their own secrets, and the princesses in Gloucestershire, holding the detonator. By noon on Wednesday, the silence from Gatcombe Park was broken, not by a press release, but by a physical courier. A single dispatch rider arrived at the Privy Purse entrance of Buckingham Palace, delivering a sealed envelope addressed directly to the king's private secretary. It was not a request for reconciliation. It was an ultimatum. Sources indicate that the document, drafted by Catherine's aggressive legal team, laid out terms that were non-negotiable. The Princess of Wales was not asking for a divorce settlement. Money has never been her motivation. She was demanding power. Specifically, the immediate and verifiable destruction of the Regency strategy document and a legally binding agreement that Queen Camilla would have zero involvement in the upbringing or future regency of Prince George. Furthermore, Kate demanded a public statement from Prince William, reaffirming his commitment to her position as the sole matriarch of the heir. The king was given 12 hours to respond. But Catherine, displaying a strategic ruthlessness that shocked the men in gray suits, did not wait for the deadline to expire before firing a warning shot. At 2 p.m., a breaking news alert flashed across screens nationwide. A senior royal correspondent for the BBC, known for their integrity, published a carefully worded article. Sources, close to the Princess of Wales, expressed deep concern over palace interference in succession plans. It was a surgical strike. The article did not leak the letter itself, nor did it mention the midnight escape. It was subtle enough to be denied if necessary, but specific enough to send a chill down the spine of everyone in Buckingham Palace. It told the king, "I am controlling the narrative now." The headline immediately trended globally. The public, already suspicious of the palace's secrecy regarding health updates, instantly rallied to Kate's defense. Inside Clarence House, the mood shifted from managed concern to outright panic. The palace PR machine, usually so adept at burying scandals, found themselves disarmed. They could not smear Catherine as unstable or difficult as they had done with Meghan Markle. Kate is the most popular member of the family. To attack her would be suicide for the monarchy. Prince William, watching the headlines roll in, reportedly realized that his wife was using his own tactics against him, but with far greater public support. The 12-hour deadline was ticking down. If the palace did not capitulate, the nuclear option remained: the full release of William's letter, exposing his betrayal to the world. The king was trapped between his wife's ambition and his daughter-in-law's vengeance. While King Charles paced his study, wrestling with the moral weight of his daughter-in-law's ultimatum, Queen Camilla was reportedly operating with a chilling clarity. Sources inside Clarence House describe a shift in the atmosphere that afternoon, a transition from defensive panic to offensive warfare. The woman who had navigated the most hostile press environment in history to become queen consort was not about to be dethroned by a letter. Camilla allegedly summoned her shadow team, a small circle of loyal aides and PR strategists known for their ability to plant stories without leaving fingerprints. The order given was simple: discredit the messenger. If Catherine was going to use her popularity as a weapon, the palace had to dismantle her credibility. The narrative they constructed was cruel, calculated, and designed to exploit the very vulnerability Kate had battled so bravely. By 4 p.m., telephones at the major tabloids began to ring. The briefing was strictly off the record, but the message was uniform. Journalists were told to investigate worrying reports about the princess's mental state. The narrative being fed to the press was that Catherine was not a victim of a regency plot, but a woman suffering from post-recovery exhaustion and paranoia. The leaks suggested that the secret letter was a figment of a fragile mind, or a standard legal draft that she had misinterpreted due to stress and medication. It was the oldest trick in the royal playbook, the hysterical woman trope. They were painting the future queen not as a whistleblower, but as a liability who needed to be managed for her own good. Camilla, sitting in the garden room, was reportedly overheard telling the king that they had no choice. She argued that protecting the crown meant neutralizing the threat, even if that threat was the mother of the heir. If we do not control this story, she is rumored to have said, she will dictate the rest of your reign. By early evening, the headlines began to shift. Fears for Kate's health grow as palace insiders cite confusion and strain. The smear campaign had begun, but in doing so, Camilla made a fatal error in judgment. She underestimated the protective instinct of the British public toward Catherine, and she underestimated Prince William. Seeing his wife painted as mentally unstable by his stepmother's machine triggered a rage in the Prince of Wales that had been dormant for decades. He was no longer the compliant heir. He picked up the phone, not to call his father, but to call the one man who could help him burn the establishment to the ground. The Civil War had just gone nuclear. The phone call that Prince William made at 5:15 p.m. did not go to a lawyer, nor did it go to a media mogul. In a move of absolute desperation and strategic brilliance, the Prince of Wales dialed a number that had not been saved in his phone for over 2 years. He called Montecito. He called Prince Harry. For years, the narrative of the feuding brothers has been the monarchy's shield and its distraction. But William knew that the only person who hated the Camilla machinery as much as he did, and the only person who had the infrastructure to bypass the British royal rota entirely, was his brother. The conversation was reportedly short, tense, but focused on a singular, shared objective: protecting Catherine. William allegedly uttered 5 words that ended the estrangement. They are doing it again. At 7 p.m. London time, the nuclear bomb detonated. It didn't come from the BBC or the Daily Mail. It came from the Arkwell Foundation in California, broadcast simultaneously on every major American network. Prince Harry and Meghan released a formal statement, authorized by Prince William. The statement was surgical in its precision. It read, "The Duke and Duchess of Sussex stand in absolute solidarity with the Princess of Wales. Any reports suggesting mental instability are not only categorically false, but are fabricated by the same palace sources that have historically weaponized mental health to silence women in this family." The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic for King Charles and Queen Camilla. By using Harry as the mouthpiece, William had outflanked the palace censors. The British media, realizing they had been fed lies by Clarence House to smear the nation's favorite royal, instantly turned. The narrative of Kate the Unstable evaporated in seconds, replaced by a much more dangerous headline: "The Palace Lied." TV anchors who had spent the afternoon speculating on Kate's breakdown were forced to issue on-air corrections. The hashtag number #CamillaIsOver began trending at #1 globally. The shadow team at Clarence House watched in horror as their smear campaign imploded, turning into a boomerang that struck the king directly. William had broken the cardinal rule of royalty: never complain, never explain. But he had gone further. He had weaponized the spare to save the Queen in waiting. By 9 p.m., Kensington Palace went a step further. On William's direct orders, and bypassing the Royal Communications Office entirely, a single photograph was posted to their official social media channels. It was a photo taken that very afternoon at Gatcombe Park. It showed Princess Kate, looking fierce and composed, sitting next to Princess Anne, reviewing legal documents. The caption was just one line, signed personally by William, focusing on the future. The truth stands tall. The message was clear. The king is isolated, the brothers are aligned, and the war for the crown has just begun. By 10 p.m., the silence inside Clarence House was absolute. The frenetic energy of the PR aides had vanished, replaced by the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of total defeat. The phones, which had been ringing incessantly for 48 hours, had stopped. There was no one left to spin the story to. The public had spoken. The press had turned, and the air had gone nuclear. King Charles III sat alone in his private study, the glow of the television screen illuminating a face that looked decades older than it had just days prior. Sources close to the monarch report that this was the moment the king physically collapsed under the weight of the crisis. The stress of the standoff, combined with the rigors of his cancer treatment, had pushed his body to its limit. But the physical pain was secondary to the emotional devastation. For the first time in his life, Charles realized he had lost control of his own family. He had gambled on the institution's ability to crush dissent, and he had lost to the modern media savvy of his sons. At 10:15 p.m., Queen Camilla reportedly attempted to enter the study. In a move that shocked the household staff, the king asked her to leave. He closed the door. It was a symbolic severing of the partnership that had defined his life. In that dark room, Charles finally accepted the grim reality. He could not save his wife's reputation and keep his crown. He had to choose. And staring at the photo of William, Kate, and Anne, united against him, he knew the choice had already been made for him. He picked up the secure line. He did not call his advisors. He called Prince William. The conversation was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. Insiders claim the king's voice was barely a whisper as he asked his son for terms. William's response was cold and professional. He demanded a face-to-face meeting immediately, not at Buckingham Palace and not at Clarence House where Camilla resided. William chose the venue, Windsor Castle, the fortress of the late Queen Elizabeth. Neutral ground, but symbolic of the duty Charles was failing to uphold. Under the cover of darkness, a small convoy left London. There were no sirens, no flags, just a defeated king traveling to meet the new power behind the throne. When Charles arrived at the castle, he was not greeted by a son, but by a rival statesman. William was waiting in the green drawing room. He was not alone. Sitting beside him, looking pale but resolute, was Catherine. She had not stayed at Gatcombe. She had flown in by helicopter to look the king in the eye. On the table between them lay two documents. One was the regency strategy letter that William had written the evidence of the betrayal. The other was a new document, drafted by Kate's lawyers. It was a letter of instrument, a legal framework that would effectively transfer the day-to-day power of the monarchy to the Prince and Princess of Wales, leaving Charles as king in name only. It was a soft abdication. The king looked at the pen, then at Kate. The time for talking was over. The endgame had arrived. The green drawing room at Windsor Castle has witnessed centuries of diplomatic treaties and royal decrees, but never has it seen a transfer of power quite like the one that occurred in the early hours of Thursday morning. The atmosphere was not one of ceremony, but of a corporate hostile takeover. King Charles III, seated across from his son and daughter-in-law, picked up the fountain pen. His hand, usually so steady in public, reportedly trembled. He was not just signing a document, he was signing away the authority he had waited 70 years to possess. The letter of instrument that lay before him was a masterclass in constitutional law and ruthless pragmatism. It did not force a formal abdication, a move that would have destabilized the Commonwealth and tainted the monarchy's image. Instead, it established a shadow regency. Under the terms of the agreement, Charles would remain king in name. He would continue to cut ribbons, attend state banquets, and wear the crown. But the red boxes, the daily government dispatches, the strategic decisions, and the control of the privy purse would now be funneled directly to the Prince and Princess of Wales. Charles was effectively agreeing to become a ceremonial figurehead in his own reign. But the most draconian terms of the treaty were reserved for Queen Camilla. This was Catherine's non-negotiable demand. Clause 4 of the document, which insiders are calling the Exile Protocol, stripped the Queen Consort of her operational power. While she would retain her title to avoid a public scandal, her influence was severed. She was banned from attending private audiences with the Prime Minister. Her shadow team of PR advisors was to be disbanded immediately. And, most humiliating of all, she was encouraged to relocate her primary residence to Ray Mill House, her private home in Wiltshire, away from the corridors of power in Buckingham Palace. It was a sentence of internal exile. The woman who had plotted to rule as regent was now reduced to a weekend wife. When Charles signed the document, the silence in the room was absolute. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, did not smile. She did not offer words of comfort. She simply reached across the antique table, took the signed document, and placed it into her leather case. The gesture was final. The soft power of the monarchy had just hardened into steel. The meeting lasted less than 40 minutes. As William and Kate rose to leave, the king remained seated, looking out into the darkness of the castle grounds. He had kept his throne, but he had lost his kingdom. The couple walked out of the green drawing room, not as heirs, but as the de facto rulers of the United Kingdom. However, as they made their way to the waiting helicopter to return to London, one final hurdle remained. The public knew there was a crisis, but they didn't know the resolution. How do you explain a coup without calling it a coup? The final act of this drama would not be played out in a castle, but on the world stage, in a broadcast that would redefine the monarchy forever. The final act of this royal coup did not take place in a courtroom or behind closed doors, but on the television screens of billions of people around the world. At 6 p.m. on Friday, the BBC interrupted its regular programming for a special announcement from Kensington Palace. The world held its breath, expecting the worst. But what they saw was a masterclass in political theater, orchestrated entirely by the new power behind the throne, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The video was not the shaky, solitary footage of a woman on a park bench that we saw months ago. This was a statement of power. Catherine stood in the gold room at Windsor Castle, looking vibrant, strong, and unmistakably regal. For the first time, Prince William stood beside her, not in front of her, but slightly behind, a visual confirmation of the new hierarchy established by the Shadow Treaty. The message was ostensibly about health. Catherine announced that her treatment had reached a positive conclusion, and that she would be returning to public duties with renewed vigor and a redefined focus. But to the trained eye, the subtext was screaming. There was no mention of the king's guidance. There was no tribute to the queen consort. It was a declaration of independence. Simultaneously, Buckingham Palace released a separate statement confirming that King Charles would be permanently scaling back his public engagements to focus on his recovery, effectively handing the reins of the monarchy to his son and daughter-in-law. The soft abdication was now official policy, sold to the public as a medical necessity rather than a palace coup. As for Queen Camilla, her erasure was swift and brutal. In the days following the broadcast, the court circular, the official record of royal engagements, was quietly updated. The Queen Consort's scheduled appearances were cancelled or reassigned to the Duchess of Edinburgh. The exile protocol was in full effect. Camilla retreated to Ray Mill House, defeated not by the press or the public, but by the one woman she had underestimated. The wicked stepmother narrative had ended, not with a bang, but with a silence so profound it was deafening. The crisis is over, but the monarchy that has emerged from the ashes is unrecognizable. The fairy tale of the happy Windsor family is dead, replaced by a ruthless, efficient corporate machine run by the Prince and Princess of Wales. Catherine has proven that she is not just a clothes horse or a mother. She is a political operator of the highest order. She walked away from the palace in the middle of the night with nothing but a letter, and she returned with the keys to the kingdom. King Charles remains on the throne, but history will record this week as the end of his reign and the beginning of the age of Catherine. The betrayal in the secret letter did not break her. It forged her into the queen she was always destined to be. The marriage may be healed, the crown may be secure, but make no mistake, the innocence is gone. This is no longer a family, it is a business. And under the new management, betrayal is no longer an option, it is a capital offense. Thank you for watching.